Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Film Archivist James Mockoski, whose work includes working for American Zoetrope in their archives. Welcome to the show, James.
Hey, thank you very much, Gordon. I appreciate you having me.
Well, I've got to ask, what is involved in being? I've never archived a film, so what is involved in archiving films for American Zoetrope?
Well, first off, I started back in about the 90s, and when archiving has been a tradition for a while, but it's been sort of with National Archives, Library of Congress, or the Cinémathèque Française, or the British Film Institute. I got involved in the 90s as sort of a student at UCSC and learning about film history. New production wasn't quite my thing. How do I fit in? And thankfully, film industry has so many niches that you could fit in, and I found that this school in England that was teaching film archiving. I thought that was incredible. That would be a wonderful part to preserve our legacy of film history. And no one realizes, but film, when you shoot film, there's thousands and thousands of things that you create. So many takes that a director will shoot, and so we have all that stuff, all the audio recordings from the set, all the production stills, all the photography, all the costumes, everything that went into that production, and that's just one film. And Francis is one of the few directors at American Zoetrope that retained a lot of this stuff. He was a director that he came from all the early days of Hollywood, and he saw that a lot of the studios were throwing away stuff, and he thought that I could do that better, because this was expensive to create. Maybe I could use it again for another production. And he was very frugal that way, and instilled to a lot of filmmakers like George Lucas to keep everything, because you never know when it might come back to be helpful again, or you might come and revisit the film, which he has done in many times, like Apocalypse Now and One from the Heart or Godfather.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because I'm sure the studios were like, yeah, we're just going to throw this out. And then DVDs came along and they're like, oh, I wish we had all that stuff for extras.
Well, a lot of the time, home video wasn't really around. It was 16 millimeters, kind of that, but not many people showed films at home. But as much, putting in a DVD or VHS tape at that time. So it was costly for them to store this stuff, and it was just seen as sell the costumes to a prop house or a costume department. So yeah, it took them a while to realize the wealth of this material, and that they could get a second life, a third life, fourth life out of this material. Now we're going to be doing a Godfather exhibit. We're lucky we still retain that stuff to be able to program a wonderful exhibit about the history of the filmmaking process of creating Godfather.
So you've been archiving since it was film, and going into digital. So what changes in terms of archiving in this digital age with digital media?
Well, digital archiving is it's not really the same thing as preserving films on film, because preserving films on film lasts so much longer. I know that a film that was shot 100 years ago and kept in the right conditions can last far longer than me storing something on digital on a hard drive. We don't even know if it will last tomorrow, if that hard drive is still around. LTO tape is still the best thing that we have to archive digital assets, but that still has its challenges, and you still need to migrate and have redundant material. So it brings its own unique challenges and headaches, and more concerned about the digital era than I was at the film in some ways.
So what is do you do restoration as well on these projects, or is it just archiving?
We started doing restoration about 10 years ago. We first started, we've always done restorations, with starting with, Apocalypse. First photochemical restoration was probably Apocalypse. And that sort of progressed. And the digital restorations we started about 10 years ago on Cotton Club, Encore, the new cut of Cotton Club. And Francis, what he loves about doing this is that he can, and as sort of the tradition of American Zoetrope, is doing everything sort of in-house and having control over it and being able to, like when you're at a lab or at another facility, you're the clock ticks. He likes to tinker with things. He likes to experiment with them. So he enjoyed that aspect of American Zoetrope, sort of taking on these things so he could finesse things on his time.
Yeah. Now, what is, like, when you're looking at something that needs restoring, like, how do you determine how far to push the cleanup? Because you also don't want to, like, I think about, like classic cars, because I know some people who restore classic cars, but they have to have, the specific numbers from the specific factory to make sure it matches everything. They can't just put in a new carburetor or something like that.
You gotta keep it stock. You have to keep it stock.
So, like, at what point are you like, we can't restore this? Like, where's that line of, we can't restore it because that will depreciate it because it'll be too clean? Or
yeah, well, this is a discussion I have. Thankfully, I have Francis of how far he wants to go with it. But generally, the idea with many of my colleagues in the field it still has to look like film, how it was shot and how it was appreciated. It was originally released. That aesthetic, that texture, still has to be retained during these restoration. The challenges with Godfather was that over the last 50 years, so much of that original negative that was shot by Gordon Willis had been destroyed. Not destroyed out of purpose, it was destroyed out of love of making new prints over again. And so because of that analog process, there's so much wear and tear on that negative. So that was a 50-year journey of trying to peel back all those layers that had been done to the film over the last 50 years. And that film, unfortunately, will never be 100% as it was when it was first released because of the damage done. But each effort that we have done over the last few years in restoration, because we've done the first restoration was with Robert Harris and Gordon Willis in 2007. They rose that bar so high, and now with the 2022 effort, is able to peel back a little bit more of the damage and replace it and find a little more of the layers that had been gone. So that idea is always to have what that original release looked like, or what the director was able to see in the lab. Most people never got to see.
So I remember, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember Walter Murch went through and helped recreate the opening for Touch of Evil.
Yes.
In that restoration.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, like, with other films that, like the directors might not be around anymore, or the cinematographer might not be around, or anything like that, what is the protocol, or what is the process to make sure that you're still respecting their
that is
their
a
vision?
Great question, and a great thing that we battle with is generally, with no one's around anymore, you sort of have to subscribe to a certain set of ethics of the restoration and not do anything that introduces your own fingerprints or your own. So it's kind of locked into that. But generally, if facilities have their own reference print or something that they are at least matching to, so I thankfully have the freedom to at least respect where we've come from, offer what we've come to. But with Francis, he's always saying, well, I've done that, let's try to do something more. And that's usually how we get a new cut, Apocalypse Now Final Cut, or Godfather Coda, because he wants at least people to try to tell a story in a different way, or at least try to find a new audience that maybe help get the film appreciated for another 50 years. So a lot of the National Archives, BFI, UCLA, Library of Congress do have to make sure that they're not doing something that the the artists would never approve on, and so that's very hard for them to do anything that's not right for the film. So there's guidelines, that we try, and we discuss this all the time. How far is too much, and we very much conscious about film grain, and the look and the texture and things. So I sort of I'm in the middle of that.
Well, it's such an interesting situation, because you want to respect the original vision, but people like myself are hungry to see this film in 4K or 8K or whatever the newest thing is.
And then face, no one ever saw it looking like that. When you were back in 72, probably the projectors were the ideal place was to see it right next to your director in the lab. That was the most ideal. But let's face it, theaters where the bulbs were dim, the audio wasn't that great. And that's mostly the public. The film was scratched. We just made a print of the conversation. First thing out of the gate, the first reel got scratched. Wow. That brings you back to, well, this is film. That was part of the process.
I remember seeing a movie in the theater once, and there was, I guess, damage to part of the film, and so they just cut that chunk out. And so also there's
the reel was out of order. I've seen that many times. So that's what situation. I mean, that's the other thing is what situation are you trying to replicate for people? Tarantino is great because he's always a lover of film. And he loved the dirt and scratches because that was his experience. So everybody has their what they think is their experience for appreciating film. And luckily I have Francis there to guide me on what he wants people to, how he wants to present it to an audience.
Now, you said you just finished up on the conversation. So what were some of the challenges in finishing or working on that project?
Well, the conversation was something that I wouldn't say it was it was the last photochemical restoration we did that was when I first started 20 years ago, 2002, and we had intermediates made on IP and an MIN, which we never used. And Rialto Pictures wanted to do it. They had been wanting to do it for 20 years, and we finally made a deal with them, and they released what we did 20 years ago. But it still needs a 4K restoration. Of it. That one's easier. I would say, Apocalypse Now is a more challenging film for restoration because the original negative cut, and you had different versions of it, Redux, Apocalypse, Final Cut, and all trying to restore that so they're all sort of matching color, texture-wise, are all sort of equal. Godfather was probably the most challenging because of the amount of damage done to the, I think, reel one, the 10 minutes in, the entire reel is gone. In that other elements were used to replicate, to restore the missing footage. And when I say missing footage, it's the original negative that had been damaged, cut out, and you had to find that 10 minutes that had been excised.
Wow. So what do you do in that situation? Do you take it from a movie, a DVD or something, or
no, you have to find other film elements because this was copied multiple times over the years. So it started with Bob Harris, 2007, going through the original negative, seeing what had been cut, replaced with dupe negative, inferior material, and then going through the vaults and finding YCM separations that were made at that time and seeing if they could be used, or CRI. So there were other elements that you could draw upon to find the replacement. Still not as superior to the original camera negative. And when back in '97 when they did a photochemical restoration, I think most of the damage had been done in 1997 because a lot of the stuff wouldn't go through the printer, so they had to use other elements so they could do that restoration. And then in 2007 with digital restoration, they were able to find some of that material, and because of digital technology was able to restore that material back in. that they couldn't do with in the photochemical process.
So it's almost like you're Indiana Jones trying to search out and find things.
It starts with detective work. It certainly does. And we had Paramount, Robert Harris, Paramount, Jeffrey Osmer, and Chuck Woodfill. They were the detectives on this because they owned Godfather. They went through the vaults. They knew their material. But when it's one of our films like Apocalypse, I love wearing that hat because it's a great process of knowing the film and going through the vaults and uncovering things that people hadn't seen for so many years. So
when you're working with like another studio, I mean, like something like Godfather, I feel everyone's on board for that, but other films, do you find like, is it an easy process? Like, is everyone excited? Yeah, let's restore these films. Or is, like you said, you know, they used to throw out their outtakes and things like that. Are they sort of like hesitant to open things up?
No, you know, Paramount was a good partner in this because they started. Andrea Callis, who runs the archive, did an amazing job because she knew this was a challenging process, and she started 5 years ago contacting, says, you know, the 50th anniversary is coming up, and so this was not something you could start in a year away from that deadline, and so she was there to make sure that the eye was on the prize and that we were giving it enough time to do the process right for the 50th anniversary. You know, other films are easier. We had Rain People with Warner Brothers and You're a Big Boy Now, and we did the restorations. There's nothing, you know. Unfortunately, Francis didn't feel like we needed to go back and rework those. The original negatives were in fairly good shape, and so sometimes you look up, it's in good shape. But Godfather was one of those films that were loved a little bit more than other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's constantly played at the Cinematheque here, so I'm sure. So, how many times have you seen The Godfather then? Now that you in different forms.
Yeah, you know, I first remember the first time I experienced Godfather was probably with my mom. It was always aired on television. Yeah, it was always like a Friday night movie, or it was around the holidays or something, you know. And that was my first experience with Godfather. They always loved the film, and so oddly enough, it was sort of a family experience, you know.
Yeah.
Over the last 30 years, I've seen it always a couple times a year. So, but then the last 3 years, I think I've saw it every day. So, yeah, and frame by frame.
Yeah.
So,
well, how do you? Because that's one of the things. Like you were saying, Francis is going in. You know, like I think about Apocalypse Now, the different cuts. How do you keep straight what the changes are? Is there like, do you keep heavy notes on that, or is there I'm just thinking how different certain little moments might have been added or extended.
Yes, well, that comes with a good editor. I have Robbie Schaefer, my editor here, and he's the one that's keeping the continuity and tracking all this stuff. But we start with the original version. We start with whatever the original negative. We start that, and then there's the discussion of Francis will say, I remember the scene. I had to cut it out for length, or it wasn't. People couldn't handle it back in '79 or what, but maybe it could make sense now. Let's put it back in. So we go to our vaults. I will find again, Francis being an archivist, kept all the dailies, all the videotapes, transfers of all the dailies, so we could, and they still work, and we have all the equipment. We could put in the 3/4 inch tape of the edit that he was working on 40 years ago, and say, okay, this is the shot. Yeah, that's the shot. So we could play with that, and then that helps us then find back the negative.
Oh, interesting. So, now I have one last question for you. You've been working on all these archive projects, but what is your favorite guilty pleasure film to watch?
Guilty pleasure films. I don't know if it's a guilty pleasure, but as a kid, what was important to me was Indiana Jones. Jaws was like those were tight films. They were fun films. So I don't know if those are guilty pleasures, but they were important to me, and that's what got me into the theater. I remember my mom worked near Lucky's in Santa Cruz, and she would get in free to the next door theater, and Indiana Jones was playing, and I saw that thing 13 times.
Wow.
And I sat in the front row every time, and I just like, this film. So I didn't know where I was going, but that was always left an impression on me, and I thought that was so fun.
It's funny because I think as a kid, I always wanted to sit in the front row. Then as a teenager, I always wanted to sit in the back row. Now I'm like, I want to sit right in the dead center.
Yeah, you want to see the sweet spot. No, my family and I always sit in the back
Yeah.
row. So, but yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, no problem. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope people will also be inspired that it's amazing to think that we could have lost something as great as Godfather.
Yeah.
And people think that we've restored these things 1,000 times, but no, you still need to keep on these things because we are film is fragile, digital assets are fragile, and I'm here to say, if it's important to you, you need to preserve it, and you need to be diligent to make sure that another generation keeps on preserving these assets.
Yeah.
So they're important to all of us.
Oh, for sure. Well, thank you so much. And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our latest courses. I'm Gordon Brickell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.